A Hasidic man in Brooklyn today dresses almost identically to how a Hasidic man dressed 300 years ago in Eastern Europe. Between then and now, empires collapsed, the Holocaust nearly destroyed the community entirely, and smartphones landed in every pocket. So how did one people hold on to their dress, language, and rhythm while the world around them transformed completely? That story begins in a small town in the 1740s. In the western Ukrainian town of Medjibij, a mystically inclined teacher named Israel ben Eliezer, who became known as the Baal Shem Tov, began attracting a dedicated circle of disciples. Traditional accounts place his birth around 1698. By the middle of the 1730s, his public activity was underway, coalescing by the late 1740s into a distinct spiritual movement. While later folklore is filled with miracle stories, historians find firmer ground in concrete archival records, including a Polish census from 1760, the very year of his death, which places his household directly in Medjibij. The Baal Shem Tov left behind no books of his own. Instead, his revolutionary ideas survived through the writings of his closest followers, such as Jacob Joseph of Polony, who published the first Hasidic work, Toldat Yaakov Yosef, in 1780, and his successor Dov Ber of Mezerich. These early texts codified a theology centered on simcha, the practice of joyful, passionate worship, and devakut, an unceasing emotional closeness to the divine. This new movement did not reject traditional Torah scholarship. Instead, it democratized Jewish spirituality, insisting that everyday actions, emotional devotion, and heartfelt prayers were just as capable of elevating the soul as elite intellectual study. By presenting these emotional practices side by side with intellectual pursuits, the early Hasidic masters made a mystical life accessible to the ordinary, often impoverished Jewish population of Eastern Europe, laying the foundation for a resilient culture that would endure across centuries. By the late 18th and 19th centuries, this loose network of disciples formed distinct, structured dynasties across Poland, Ukraine, Galicia, Belarus, Hungary, and Romania. Central to this institutional shift was the Rebbe, not just a rabbi, but a dynastic spiritual guide whose authority shaped everything from theological study to personal and communal life decisions. Followers gathered around the Rebbe's court, a term describing the leader's inner circle, and localized communal institutions rather than a royal setting. Each group forged its own character. In Belarus, Shneur Zalman of Liadi founded Chabad, combining mystical devotion with rigorous intellectual philosophy. In Transylvania, the Satmar dynasty took root in the town of Satu Mare, establishing a strictly separatist communal culture. Meanwhile, Bobov developed in Galicia, carving out its own legacy through distinct melodies, customs, and lineage. As these dynasties grew, they shared common mystical roots but remained highly diverse, separated by geography, prayer liturgies, and leadership lines. During this era of growth, regional Eastern European clothing, once the typical dress of the local population, gradually transformed into a deliberate, sacred marker of belonging to a specific Hasidic court. Between 1939 and 1945, the Nazi regime systematically destroyed the physical and social geography of European Hasidism. The catastrophe dismantled the entire social fabric of this civilization. Across Poland, Ukraine, Hungary, and Romania, the historic headquarters of dynasties like Ger, Satmar, Bobov, and Belz vanished. Synagogues, schools, printing presses, and communal archives were burned. Alongside these physical structures, the war obliterated the delicate, unwritten networks of daily life, the local charity systems, generational oral melodies, handwritten spiritual texts, and the Yiddish-speaking neighborhoods that had sustained these communities for 2 centuries. After 1945, a small number of survivors, joined by later immigrants, began the work of active reconstruction, choosing to build anew instead of attempting to restore the vanished towns of Europe. They gathered in new urban centers, primarily in Israel and the United States. In Brooklyn, two distinct neighborhoods became the epicenters of this renewal. In the late 1940s, Rabbi Joel Teitelbaum gathered Satmar survivors in Williamsburg, establishing a strictly self-contained, separatist community on Bedford Avenue. At the same time, Crown Heights developed as the global center for Chabad Lubavitch under Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who transformed the brick building at 770 Eastern Parkway into a launching pad for global outreach. While Teitelbaum favored strict communal isolation to protect the remnants of tradition, Schneerson pursued expansive engagement with the wider Jewish world. Yet, both leaders followed a remarkably similar institutional sequence to rebuild their societies. First, they established a basic prayer space in a school, such as the Satmar Yeshiva, that opened in Williamsburg in 1951. Once these foundations were secure, they layered on charity networks, burial societies, Yiddish publishing houses, and kosher food supervision, slowly assembling a self-sustaining neighborhood ecosystem from the ground up. Walk down Bedford Avenue in Williamsburg or Eastern Parkway in Crown Heights in 2026, and the immediate soundscape is Yiddish. It is not a preserved language of a museum, but a living, changing tongue spoken by toddlers, mothers in supermarkets, and merchants on their phones. This contemporary Yiddish has naturally absorbed English nouns and modern tech terminology, while keeping its centuries-old Germanic grammar and distinct regional dialects intact. While Hebrew remains reserved for prayer and study, and English handles civic and external commercial life, Yiddish remains the language of the home and the street. This linguistic world operates on a temporal rhythm set by ancient law. Every day, 3 prayer services, Shacharit, Mincha, and Ma'ariv, structure the hours. Weekly, the arrival of Shabbat on Friday evening forms a wall between the sacred and the commercial. For 25 hours, phones are powered down, cars sit idle, and commerce halts. The entire neighborhood layout supports this lifestyle. Within walking distance of every home are yeshivas, synagogues, study halls, ritual baths, and kosher grocers, forming a self-contained ecosystem where family life and communal services are tightly linked. Yet, this striking visible continuity coexists with intense participation in the global economy. The long black coats and fur hats of the men, with variations in silk, velvet, or synthetic blends distinguishing a Satmar follower from a Bobov chassid, are worn by entrepreneurs managing international firms in real estate, textiles, and technology. To operate in this modern marketplace, they do not reject digital tools, but carefully regulate them. Many carry kosher smartphones, specially modified Android devices that have had web browsers removed and internet access filtered under rabbinic supervision. A Satmar business owner might use a device restricted only to calls, email, and navigation, while a Chabad professional might utilize a broader set of apps for work and outreach, though both disable all digital transmissions on Shabbat. It is a pragmatic negotiation. The struggle is not a simple opposition to the modern world, but a deliberate decision of exactly how technology may cross the threshold of a traditional community without rewriting its sacred boundaries. The silhouette on a Brooklyn street today immediately recalls the mid-18th century Polish frontier. The long black coat, the formal Sabbath garments, and the heavy fur hat trace directly back to 1750. Yet, this clothing is not a static costume. Modern wool blend fabrics, precise tailoring, and distinct cuts reflect centuries of evolving dynastic choices. The language, too, resists stagnation. Yiddish survives not as a museum piece preserved in isolation, but through active, daily transmission. When it comes to technology, the contrast is stark. While the physical world has transformed, the community does not reject modern tools. Instead, it enforces selective regulation over unrestricted adoption. Even the social architecture has changed. The localized, informal court of the early Rebbe has expanded into a massive, formal institutional network. While the visible symbols and religious rhythms show the strongest resemblance, the economic and organizational machinery supporting them has changed substantially. This continuity represents preservation through adaptation. Today, this preservation is not a rejection of modern life, but a masterful negotiation with it. By choosing what to adapt, they keep their sacred core intact. In an era of endless change, it asks us all, what is worth holding on to? Share your thoughts below.